If you'd asked me 10 years ago what success looked like, I wouldn't have described yachts or private jets. No, my definition of success was far more modest, and apparently, far more offensive to my family. All I wanted was a small house with creaky floors, a kitchen with enough space for a coffee machine that wasn't second-hand, and a front door no one else had a key to. So I started saving. At 22, I opened a high-yield savings account with the kind of reverence most people reserve for religious artifacts. The bank teller even congratulated me, as if I'd done something miraculous. I guess, in hindsight, maybe I had. Because over the next decade, I did something my family considered borderline heretical. I said, no. No to vacations. No to new cars. No to dinners where Aiden would inevitably say, "Bro, can you cover me? My startup funds are just in a little holding pattern." A holding pattern. Translation: he spent the last of his investor money on an NFT shaped like a ferret in a bow tie. I watched friends take trips to Greece, buy condos, host engagement parties in rooftop bars. Meanwhile, I bought groceries with coupons and learned exactly how many meals you could stretch out of a sack of rice and frozen broccoli. Every dollar was a step closer to freedom. And every family gathering was a reminder that my freedom was apparently everyone else's emergency fund. My mother never failed to twist the knife. "You know, Ethan, it's wonderful you're so disciplined," she'd say, her tone coated in something sticky and sweet. "But money is for sharing. We help each other in this family." Right. Except, each other always meant me helping Aiden. Aiden, with his brilliant ideas and complete inability to hold a job longer than the lifespan of a housefly. Aiden, who'd once told me I was too uptight about money, like financial stability was a personal failing. I'd learned to smile through it. I'd learned to let them believe I was naive. Because in their eyes, I was always the boring one. The dependable one. The ATM with a heartbeat. And I didn't care, because I had a plan. Every night, I logged into my bank account to watch the numbers climb. $50,000. $100,000. $150,000. By the time I hit $250,000, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relief. That money wasn't just money. It was proof I could choose my own life. Proof that no matter how many times my father rolled his eyes and called me obsessive, no matter how many lectures I endured about family loyalty, I had done it anyway. I had built something that belonged to me. And that terrified them. I know this now. Because while I was busy believing my discipline would keep me safe, they were busy proving me wrong. If you'd asked me then whether my family would ever cross that line, take what wasn't theirs, I would have laughed. Because no matter how transactional they were, I still thought there was a line they wouldn't cross. Turns out, the only thing naive about me was believing they had limits. And the day I found out exactly how wrong I was? That was the day I stopped caring what they thought. If you've never been the designated responsible one, let me explain what it feels like. It's a compliment right up until the moment your family realizes responsibility makes you easy to exploit. It started innocently enough. Calls from my mother that sounded like small talk, but always circled back to one thing. "How are you managing all that money, Ethan?" The first time she asked, I thought she was genuinely curious. Like maybe, finally, she was proud of me. I remember sitting on the couch, my laptop open on a housing listing I couldn't quite afford yet, and smiling like an idiot. "It's going well," I told her. "I'm thinking I'll start seriously shopping for a place by the end of the year." "Oh." She made a little hum in the back of her throat. "Are you sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket? Markets can turn, you know." I should have recognized it then, the tone. Like she was just planting a seed of doubt to soften me up for the inevitable ask. But I wanted so badly to believe she was just worried. That was the first sign. The second sign came in the form of Aiden calling me at 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Ethan, hey," he said, voice full of manufactured urgency. "Listen, I've been going over some numbers, and I think I've cracked this funding problem." I said, because I knew exactly where this was going. "I just need a bridge," he continued. "A short-term loan. A partnership, really. And since you're so good with your finances." There it was. Aiden had mastered the art of making a financial bailout sound like a collaboration. I told him no. I told him I was saving for something important. I told him he should talk to a bank. And he did what he always did when I refused. He sighed dramatically and said, "God, you're so obsessed with hoarding. It's honestly sad." Then he hung up. I remember sitting in the dark after that, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the number in my account, $243,811.46, and feeling something shift. A crack in the wall between me and them. I told myself it was fine. That they were just frustrated. That no one would actually do something as insane as take what wasn't theirs. But then the third sign came. And it wasn't subtle. One Saturday afternoon, I logged into my account to transfer a little extra into my savings. But the login screen had changed. New security questions I hadn't set. New backup email I'd never seen. My stomach dropped. I reset the password, hard hammering so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. When I finally got in, everything looked normal, same balance, same transactions. But there was an alert in the corner. Recent changes to account permissions. I called the bank. 37 minutes on hold. A woman named Jenna finally picked up. "Yes, it looks like a new authorized user was added last week," she said, her tone brisk, like this was perfectly ordinary. "What name?" I asked. A pause. "A Mr. Daniel Carter." My father. My mouth went dry. I don't remember what I said to her. Something about removing him immediately. Something about changing every password and security question. Something about mailing me physical statements, because I no longer trusted anything digital. When I finally hung up, I sat there in the silence, trying to understand the math of it. How you could raise a child to believe in hard work, then decide his hard work belonged to you. How you could look at your own son's future and see nothing but spare parts for your favorite child's ambitions. It was the first time I wondered if my father had ever seen me as anything more than a contingency plan. And it was the first time I realized. If they were willing to do this, they were willing to do anything. I'd love to tell you I handled it with grace. That I took a deep breath, thought it through, and calmly assessed my options like a grown adult. But the truth? When I logged in again 2 weeks later and saw the balance, I felt like I'd been shot. $712.09. That was it. From $250,000 to an amount that wouldn't even cover my rent for the next month. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. A glitch. A misfire of the app. I refreshed the page so many times my fingers cramped. I called the bank again, voice shaking so badly I had to repeat my name 3 times before they understood me. Jenna, same calm, unfazed voice, explained the transfer had been made by the authorized user. My father. A consolidation of assets, she called it, like she was reading a recipe. I asked her if she understood what she was saying. That was my entire life. I told her, voice flat and hollow. She didn't answer. Because what could she say? I don't know how long I sat there after I hung up. Long enough for the sun to move across the floor, painting a rectangle of light that looked like the door to somewhere I'd never be able to afford now. I pressed my palms against my temples, feeling the edges of something unspooling in my head. I thought about all the times I'd said no. All the years I'd told myself I was safe because I was careful. All the birthdays I'd spent alone so I could put another $500 in that account. All gone. I wanted to call someone. But I didn't have anyone to call. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. All those years I'd been so determined not to need anyone, so no one could take anything from me, and in the end, the only people I trusted were the ones who stole it all. I remember staring at the screen, my heart beat a dull thump behind my eyes, and thinking, this is what betrayal looks like. Not some big cinematic moment. Not a dramatic fight or a slammed door. Just a number on a screen, smaller than it was the day before. I shut the laptop, hands trembling. And for a second, just one, I let myself imagine driving to my parents' house and screaming at them. Telling them they'd broken something in me I didn't know how to fix. But even in my fantasies, they didn't care. Even in my imagination, my father shrugged and my mother dabbed her eyes and said I was overreacting. I stood up. I went to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face and looked in the mirror. I didn't recognize myself. I looked older. Tired. A man who'd traded 10 years of his life for nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing they'd never think they'd done anything wrong. They'd call it family. They'd call it love. And they'd sleep just fine. I knew then I had to confront them. Because if I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life letting them define me. And I'd already wasted enough time. I didn't bother calling ahead. If I'd given them any warning, they'd have cooked up a dozen excuses, each more patronizing than the last. So I drove straight to their house, a bland suburban colonial with shutters that hadn't been painted since Aiden's second bankruptcy, and marched up the steps without knocking. I swung the door open so hard it rattled. My father looked up from his recliner like I'd interrupted an important summit instead of an afternoon nap. "Ethan," he said, voice bored. "You could have called." I could have. But the look on his face when he realized I knew was worth every mile of that drive. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice so steady it startled even me. He didn't pretend not to understand. He just lifted his glass, a cheap scotch, always, and took a sip. "Where's what?" he drawled. "My money." Aiden appeared in the hallway, looking exactly like a man who'd gotten everything handed to him and still managed to screw it up. "Oh, this is about that," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Look, it's not what you think." "Really?" I cut in, my voice rising. "Because I think you stole $250,000 from me." My mother appeared behind him, clutching the edges of her cardigan like it was a life vest. "Don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "It's family money, Ethan." The words landed like a slap. Family money. They said it like I hadn't skipped meals to save. Like I hadn't turned down every chance to live because I believed the promise that discipline would eventually buy me freedom. Dad set his glass down and leaned back, his smirk so casual it made my hands shake. "You should be thanking us," he said. "Your money has now secured your brother's bright future." I blinked. For a second, I wondered if I'd hallucinated it. But no, he was looking me right in the eye, daring me to disagree. Aiden had the nerve to look sheepish. "It's just a loan," he said. "Once the project gets going." "Don't." I didn't trust myself to say more. My father sighed, as if he were the victim here. "You've always been so naive," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Did you really think you could hoard all that money and we'd just sit by? That's not how family works." He actually chuckled. Like he was explaining something obvious to a dim-witted child. I felt my face flush hot, my heart banging against my ribs. There it was, the truth I'd never let myself look at head-on. They didn't love me. Not the way I'd always hoped. They respected what I could give them. They tolerated my existence because it was convenient. And the second it wasn't, they'd strip mine my life without a flicker of guilt. I looked around the living room, the framed photos of Aiden at every milestone, the blank space where mine should have been, and something in me finally snapped. I laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was the kind of laughter you hear in hospital waiting rooms at 3 a.m., too loud, too sharp, carrying more despair than humor. My mother flinched. My father's smirk faltered. And in that tiny moment of confusion, I realized I was done being their safety net. I was done pretending we were ever a real family. I wiped my eyes and straightened. "You have no idea what you've done," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it as a promise. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. If I had, I think I would have lost my nerve. But I didn't. I closed the door behind me and let the cold autumn air swallow me whole. And even in that shock and grief, there was something else blooming in my chest. A cold, bright certainty. This was the last time they'd ever get a piece of me. I didn't drive straight home. I didn't even know where I was going. I just kept turning down roads until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally pulled over, it was in front of a gas station on Route 41, the kind of place that sold 4-day-old hot dogs and scratch-off tickets nobody ever won. I sat there, engine ticking, watching the neon sign flicker in and out. And I laughed again, quieter this time, but no less raw. Because the absurdity of it all hit me like a punch. I'd given up everything for a decade so I could build a life on my own terms. And in the end, I was right back where I started, exhausted, alone, and broke. But here's the thing. For the first time, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like clarity. Because once you see the truth, once you really look it in the eye, there's no going back. I sat there for a long time, the cold creeping in around me, until my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "You okay?" I stared at the message, feeling something tighten in my throat. Emma was the only person I'd ever trusted with the real numbers, the real plan. She was the only one who never tried to make me feel small for wanting something simple. I typed back. "No. Can I come over?" Her reply came instantly. "Always." I started the engine and drove to her apartment. When she opened the door, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the last of the panic out of my chest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. And for a moment I let myself feel it all, the rage, the humiliation, the dull ache of 10 years dissolving overnight. But under it, something else was sparking. Not despair. Not fear. Resolve. While I showered in Emma's tiny bathroom, I thought about my father's smug expression. "Thanks for your naivety." It replayed in my head like a scratched record. And the more I heard it, the more it stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like a challenge. When I emerged, Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop open. "Okay," she said, her eyes sharp in a way I'd never seen before. "Walk me through everything. Every login, every transaction, every document. We're going to figure out exactly what they did." I almost laughed again, this time with relief. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. We stayed up until 2 in the morning. Emma clicked through account statements while I dictated names and dates. At some point, she got up and made coffee strong enough to strip paint off the walls. I drank it anyway. And somewhere between the third and fourth mug, I realized I was done being the family scapegoat. Done being the responsible one, whose only reward was getting picked clean. I was tired of feeling ashamed for wanting my own life. I was tired of apologizing for not being Aiden. So I stopped. Just like that. I looked up from the spreadsheet, my chest tight and hollow, and said out loud, "They're never getting another piece of me." Emma nodded like she'd been waiting for me to say it. "Good," she said softly. "Because you deserve better." And for the first time since that nightmare of a bank call, I actually believed it. The cold fire in my belly wasn't going away. It was settling in. Burning steady. Not rage. Not grief. Something cleaner. Determination. They thought they'd taken everything. But they forgot the most important thing. I was still here. And I wasn't done. I always thought the worst thing my family could do was steal my money. I was wrong. Because the real horror started when we began peeling back the layers. Emma and I turned her kitchen table into a command center, laptops, printouts, yellow highlighters bleeding across statements like crime scene tape. It was almost comical, how quickly the pattern emerged. At first, it was just that single transfer, the one that drained my savings. But then we noticed the shell companies. 3 of them. All with names so bland you'd never look twice. Stonebridge Consulting. Apex Synergy. Horizon Strategies. Sounds respectable, right? Turns out, each was registered to the same P.O. box in a strip mall 2 towns over. And the primary contact listed? My father. Jesus, Emma breathed. Did you know he was doing this? No, I said. My voice sounded distant in my own ears. I didn't. Aiden's name popped up, too, on a half-dozen invoices marked consulting fees. Consulting on what? How to blow through money faster than a gambler on speed. Every click we made uncovered something worse. My identity had been used as collateral on a line of credit I never applied for. My signature, poorly forged, like a teenager practicing in the dark, was on at least 2 loan documents. It felt surreal, sitting there in Emma's cheerful apartment with the little ceramic cat on the windowsill, realizing that the people who raised me had spent years quietly laying the groundwork to make me the fall guy. They didn't just steal your money, Emma said, her face pale. They stole your name. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to force back the nausea. All those late nights. All those paychecks I hoarded. All that self-denial so I could have something that was only mine. And in the end, they'd taken it anyway, plus a few IOUs in my name for good measure. I'm going to be ruined, I whispered. Emma put her hand over mine. No, she said firmly. You're not. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't sure. And that uncertainty, small, flickering, but real, lit something in me I hadn't felt before. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind. This was cold. Clean. Surgical. It was the knowledge that no one was coming to save me. That if I wanted to get out of this, I'd have to dismantle their mess myself. We spent the entire night cataloging everything. Screenshots of every transfer. PDFs of every forged document. A spreadsheet of all the shell companies, dates, and amounts. At dawn, Emma made more coffee. I stared at the pile of evidence, my heart hammering. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd crawl back to them, humiliated, grateful for any crumbs of forgiveness. But as I looked over the paper trail, so sloppy it was almost insulting, I realized something that made me laugh out loud, a jagged, exhausted sound. They were greedy. They were careless. And they were arrogant enough to believe they'd never be caught. That was their mistake. And I was going to make sure it cost them everything. Funny thing about arrogance, it makes you sloppy. They were so sure they'd stripped me bare that they never imagined I'd planned for this. I hadn't told anyone, not even Emma, that 2 months before I'd gotten nervous. The economy was wobbling, my parents were acting jumpier than usual, and something in my gut had whispered, move the money. So I did. I'd opened a separate account in a credit union 2 counties over. Quiet. Old school. No online access. Just a passbook and my signature on file. And I transferred nearly everything. $240,000. I left just enough in the main account to keep it active, a decoy balance to lull everyone into thinking my nest egg was untouched. The money they'd stolen? It was the $10,000 I'd left behind. Chump change compared to what they thought they'd seized. But that wasn't the part that made me laugh until my ribs hurt. Because as Emma and I cross-referenced those shell company deposits, the dates lined up in a way that was too perfect to be an accident. The day they drained my decoy account was the same day they moved funds through those dummy corporations, funds that, as we discovered, were traced back to fraudulent loans taken out in my name. In their hurry to scoop up what they thought was my life savings, they had accidentally siphoned their own laundered money, leaving a paper trail so obvious a half-blind accountant could follow it. I pressed my palms to my forehead, adrenaline buzzing through me like static electricity. They stole their own trap, I whispered. Emma blinked. Say that again. They didn't get my money, I said. They got their own. And now the banks think I was complicit. It was almost poetic. My father's voice echoed in my head. Thanks for your naivety. I wanted to call him. To say, actually, Dad, turns out I was smarter than you gave me credit for. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Leverage. Because now, I didn't just have proof of theft. I had proof of a conspiracy. The forged signatures. The fraudulent loans. The shell companies. And the receipts showing that the very money they'd stolen was never mine to begin with. It was a house of cards. And I was holding the box fan. Emma closed her laptop, her eyes wide. This is bigger than your savings, she said. I nodded. It's their entire scheme, I said. And if we turn this over to the right people, they're finished. The word tasted like justice. It also tasted like fear. Because if this was going to end, I'd have to burn every last bridge. But as I sat there, exhausted and furious and more alive than I'd felt in years, I realized something simple. They'd already set fire to the bridge the moment they decided my life was worth less than Aiden's next grift. All I was doing now was making sure the flames finally reached them, too. I didn't sleep the night we finalized the dossier. While Emma double-checked dates and attachments, I just sat there on her worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in lazy circles, wondering what my father would say when he realized he wasn't the smartest man in the room anymore. We printed everything, hundreds of pages. Labeled, tabbed, cross-referenced. At sunrise, we drove it all to the nearest FBI field office. I'd never set foot in a place like that. It looked exactly how you'd imagine: neutral gray walls, somber suits, and a quiet that felt more like judgment than calm. The clerk at the counter raised her eyebrows as I lugged in the box of evidence. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone somewhere between suspicious and intrigued. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'd like to report a large-scale identity theft and financial fraud scheme. The primary suspects are my parents." She didn't blink. Instead, she gestured to a chair. "Wait here," she said. We waited an hour. When the agent finally came out, mid-40s, hairline receding, face set in a look that said he'd seen every kind of human treachery, he didn't waste time. He motioned us into a small conference room with a battered table and chairs that creaked if you breathed too hard. "Walk me through it," he said. So we did. Every detail. Every forged document. Every transfer. Every time my father signed my name like it was his. By the time we finished, the agent had flipped through 3 legal pads. He exhaled a long, tired sigh. "You realize," he said slowly, "this isn't just a family dispute. This is federal fraud, identity theft, and potentially money laundering." I nodded. "I realize," I said. "I also realize if you don't do something, they'll do it to me again, or to someone else." He studied me for a long moment. Then he said the words that made my heart finally unclench. "We'll handle it from here." 3 weeks later, it happened. No big scene. No Hollywood dramatics. Just 3 unmarked cars pulling up in front of my parents' house one rainy Thursday morning. I wasn't there. But Emma was. She watched from her car across the street. And when my phone rang, her voice was low, steady, and more satisfied than I'd ever heard it. "They're arresting them," she said. "Both?" "Both." I closed my eyes, a surge of relief and something darker rolling through me. "Are they saying anything?" I asked. "Oh yeah," she said. "Your dad looks like he's trying to lecture the agent. Your mom's crying." I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt done. Like the part of me that had always been waiting for their approval had finally died. Later, when the official statement came through my lawyer, it was satisfyingly clinical. The suspects were taken into custody for questioning related to multiple counts of fraud, wire transfers across state lines, and identity theft. There it was. The entire rotten edifice they'd built, collapsing in a few short paragraphs. I thought I'd feel guilty, pressing charges against my own parents. But as I lay in bed that night, the rain tapping against the window, all I felt was something I hadn't tasted in years. Peace. They thought they'd destroyed me. But they'd only freed me. If you told me 6 months earlier that I'd be the reason my parents were indicted, I would have laughed. But when the dust settled, and their mugshots landed on local news sites under the words, "Family fraud ring uncovered," I didn't laugh. I just felt tired. Aiden, unsurprisingly, was the first to resurface. He launched an online smear campaign so melodramatic it read like a rejected script for a reality show. "My vindictive brother turned on his own family," he posted, conveniently forgetting he was named in half the subpoenas. He tried to paint me as an ungrateful parasite who owed everything to the people who raised him. Which was rich, coming from a man who once borrowed my car for a meeting, and came back 2 days later smelling like tequila and regret. At first I thought about responding, posting all the evidence, the timelines, the notarized affidavits proving every word was true. But then Emma reminded me. "You don't owe them an explanation. Let them scream into the void." So I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. Nothing. I didn't engage. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. I let the facts speak for themselves. And they did. Within a month, the legal filings became public record. The press picked up the story. Suddenly, Aiden's hashtags about brotherly betrayal didn't look so compelling next to copies of forged loan agreements with my signature. Extended family fractured. Some cousins sent polite, cautious texts. Others sided with my parents, hissing that I'd destroyed everything. I stopped replying to any of them. Because the truth was simple. They'd destroyed themselves. And now, for the first time, I had nothing tying me to them. 2 months after the arrests, I did something I'd been dreaming about since I was 22. I bought a house. It wasn't big, just a little craftsman bungalow with a crooked mailbox and a garden overrun by dandelions. But when the realtor handed me the keys, my hands were steady. No more second-guessing. No more apologizing. I stood in the empty living room, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and exhaled. I was home. Not because someone gave it to me. Not because I'd been lucky. Because I'd fought for it. When I turned the key in the front door for the first time, it felt like closing a chapter I'd been trapped in my whole life. I wasn't the responsible one. I wasn't the fallback plan. I wasn't the naive son who let everyone take what they wanted. I was just Ethan. A man who'd survived the unthinkable. And come out clean on the other side. They thought they took my future. But they only took their own. People love a redemption arc. They want the story to end with some big, sappy moment. Me forgiving everyone, hugging Aiden in a courthouse hallway, promising we'd start over. But real life isn't a Hallmark movie. Real life is quieter. Messier. More honest. 6 months after I moved into the bungalow, I was still unpacking boxes I hadn't dared open in years. Old photos, birthday cards with my name misspelled, a stack of letters from my father with the word responsibility underlined like a threat. I almost threw them out. But instead, I'd put them in a folder marked evidence. Not because I planned to use them, but because I never wanted to forget. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. I would never let myself be that trusting again. My therapist, a soft-spoken man named Harris who always smelled like peppermint, asked me once if I regretted pressing charges. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. I regret letting it get that far. Because the truth is, there were 100 moments when I could have drawn a line. But I didn't. I kept believing if I just worked harder, if I just saved more, if I was just patient, they'd eventually see me as more than a wallet. That was the most dangerous lie of all. It took losing everything to understand my worth had never been up for negotiation. So I built new boundaries like walls around my life. No more surprise visits. No more calls. Just to talk. No more guilt masquerading as love. Some people tried to shame me for it. But they're still your parents. They'd say, voices dripping with judgment. And I'd smile, just a little, and reply. And I'm still their son. But I'm not their property. I planted a little vegetable garden in the backyard that spring. Watched the tomatoes come up in neat rows, bright and defiant. Emma came by every Sunday with fresh bread and a bottle of cheap wine, and we'd sit on the porch talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand at the window and think about all the versions of me I'd left behind. The boy who thought sacrifice would buy him love. The young man who mistook manipulation for family. The adult who thought boundaries were selfish. I grieved for him. But I didn't miss him. Because the man I'd become wasn't afraid anymore. He didn't need anyone's permission to exist. He didn't need validation from people who never saw him as an equal. He was free. The last time I checked the news, my parents were awaiting sentencing. Aiden had vanished into whatever corner of the internet still believed in his delusions. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be. Quiet. At peace. Building something that would never be stolen again. The freedom, the authenticity, the hard-won peace. I'd finally learned they were priceless.